Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we have an interesting topic around neurodivergence and productivity. One thing that I have noticed personally for myself and also have observed it in many people that I know, have worked with, and have worked for, is that some of the more traditional corporate culture practices for productivity, management, and oversight do not work nearly as well to support neurodivergents who are doing different tasks. Examples of this include things like micromanagement and that awful term accountability, which is often misused in its meaning anyway. The first thing to understand about the brain of a neurodivergent person is that there are differences in the way different aspects are functioning, including things like dopamine. Dopamine is connected to motivation, reward, and even the initiation of a task. In a neurotypical brain, it is released fairly consistently when it comes to things like obligations, deadlines, and consequences. In those cases, doing something just because you have to works reasonably well. The brain is capable of generating enough motivational fuel to push the movement forward. There is a fundamental difference in the relationship with dopamine in neurodivergent brains. That same obligation-based signal doesn't create the same motivational response. It's not laziness, which is another term that frequently gets thrown around. It is simply a different neurological requirement. What ignites that response is interest, novelty, urgency that feels real and not created, and challenges being challenged. Also, a relationship stake. Someone that you care about is involved. These differences are not preferences, personality quirks, they're neurological differences and neurological requirements in order to create sufficient dopamine to initiate and also sustain action taking. And without at least one of those different things present, the neurodivergent brain is working with insufficient fuel to power it forward to begin the task and get it done. This is why that same person can hyper-focus for 6 hours or longer on something that genuinely interests them or fascinates them, but struggle to send a single email that is routine. So novelty, urgency that's real and not made up, being challenged, interest or fascination, and a relationship stake or someone that you care about. The next element here is what's required for initiation. And this has to do with the state of the nervous system. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for things like planning, decision-making, focus, doesn't function as well when the nervous system is dysregulated. There's emotional distress, there is sensory overwhelm, there may be emotional residue from something that's happened earlier in the day. So let's say they've had an argument or received an upsetting email, or there's something in the back of their mind that's troubling them. That prefrontal cortex is partially offline. There's loss of access to that cognitive capacity to move forward with the task at hand. And a neurodivergent brain often has a more narrow window of tolerance for this. The impact of that emotional dysregulation is hitting harder and faster than it may for a neurotypical brain. What that means in practical application is that nervous system regulation is not just a luxury, it needs to happen before the real work can begin. Things like movement, music, other ways that people find to soothe their nervous system or to resolve the emotional residue. Even small things like splashing cold water in your face that triggers a nerve pathway, rapidly shifting that nervous system towards calm. And of course, we have many other mindset tools that are highly effective in soothing and calming the nervous system, then allowing for real productivity to occur. Another element here is the weight of things that are unfinished. A task that wasn't completed, a decision that wasn't yet made or that you've been avoiding, a message that's been left unanswered. Your brain is kind of holding all of these things open neurologically, creating a background that is being processed constantly but never fully resolving. It's like it's running quietly in the background, but it's consuming cognitive resources the entire entire time. Incomplete tasks create that persistent cognitive background load, and working memory is getting pulled in order to continue to monitor that unfinished situation. This is one of the reasons why we sometimes feel like if we notice a messy spot in our working area, or we remember that we never replied to a text message that we needed to, getting that done first and kind of cleaning up and tidying all those little pieces allows for the cognitive resources to become freed up so we can now move forward with our other tasks. Where some people can set those things aside more easily, the neurodivergent brain is running all of those incomplete things in the background, preventing them from being able to move forward. Getting things out of your head and onto paper, making a decision about each one. Even if that decision is to deal with it later, it's written down and it's now part of the to-do list. The brain registers that that information is now externally stored. It can stop holding on to it and trying to remember it, and releases it from that active monitoring. And that allows us to reclaim some of that cognitive capacity. Another aspect here is visual stimulation in the background. And yes, I'm talking about clutter. We don't experience physical surroundings passively. Even when you think you're not paying attention to those elements, your brain is constantly processing what it's seeing and sensing in that background, and it's using your environment to build predictions about what's required, what's safe, what isn't, and what's happening around you. Those stimuli in your visual field aren't just sitting quietly, they are competing for your neural attention. So it's not so much that you're able to ignore it, even if it seems that way, it's still getting processed at a subconscious level. And all of that visual noise creates competing signals, different things that are secretly vying for your attention and consuming some of those cognitive resources that are needed to do the task that you set out to do. Kind of keeping the nervous system in a low level of alertness at all times, and that impairs that same prefrontal function that we need for focus. So tidying up the environment, keeping it a little bit tidier, addressing other elements that feel unfinished in the background before trying to focus on that important project or task is not procrastinating, it's removing interference. Even clearing one surface can create a meaningful shift in some of that distracted background. And going back to the different ways that motivation happens, interest, challenge, autonomy are all neurological inputs that are very important for that dopamine production that allows the task to be done. When you have another person, an outside party, micromanaging or holding you accountable, dictating every step, monitoring every output, removing that person's autonomy and their own agency to approach the task in their own unique way, or in particular, approaching it in a way that feels meaningful and engaging to them, they are stripping out the fuel that's needed to do the project or task. The neurodivergent brain just doesn't perform best under that type of control, micromanagement, accountability. It actually performs worse. And having that autonomy can have a big impact on motivation and cognitive performance. It's the difference between being intrinsically motivated and getting into that flow state or hyper-focus. Those states generate their own dopamine, driving the task completion or project forward, rather than wasting cognitive resources on doing whatever that bare minimum is to avoid getting into trouble. It's a completely different neurological state to have that intrinsic motivation, that flow state, versus that much less creative, much less productive, much less sustainable state of fear. Micromanagement also compounds that nervous system dysregulation that we've mentioned, causing the emotional distress that is often a background interference or distraction in being capable of focusing on the task, particularly when paired with constant monitoring, unpredictable or negative feedback, and most importantly, the removal of control over your own process. These are all stressors that activate the brain's alarm system and decrease productivity, motivation, and focus. Keeps all of the stress hormones elevated, which also impairs prefrontal function. function. And then to top it all off, when that system fails and the person doesn't get the task completed anyway because of all of those factors, they're then told that they lack discipline, that they need even more oversight to function better, and the problem only compounds. The benefits of having these understandings and insights into the way your own brain works is that it allows you to now become the architect of your own productivity. It's about designing the right environment, the right systems, and the right setup that actually support your work. So checking in on some of those elements that can really drive motivation, things like having a genuine interest or fascination with the subject. While that may not always be available depending on the task at hand, there are other motivational elements. Being challenged just enough for it to be a challenge or a problem to solve without being in over your head or overwhelmed. But it's also equally important that it's not overly easy. Also, adding in elements of novelty or newness, making it feel fresh in some new way. And then also that relationship stake. Caring about another person who may be impacted positively or negatively by the task being done or not done. So we can access and utilize some of these different motivational components to drive up our own success in completing the task or project. Also, very importantly, as mentioned, regulating before beginning. So nervous system regulation, there are a variety of different tools that can be used. Everyone sort of has their own strategies that work well for them. Of course, you've heard me talk previously about some that I like and I use and recommend to others, including tools like hypnosis, yoga nidra, EFT tapping, meditation, mindfulness. There are so many tools at our disposals that we now have access to with relative ease that we can learn how to regulate our own nervous system before beginning our productivity work. Even things like a 10-minute walk, a little bit of gentle movement. We know that movement and exercise literally changes your brain chemistry in ways that support focus. It might be some soft music that works for some. It does not work for everyone. Some people like aromatherapy. Some people like silence. Doing what works for you to change your own internal state so that you are emotionally balanced. And certainly in your off time, taking care of any things that are causing emotional distress. Closing those open loops, writing down anything that's in the background of your mind that may be distracting you or that feels unfinished so that you can come back to it later when you've completed your task or project. If there's an email you've been avoiding, make a note of when you plan to send it, reschedule it for a different day, or acknowledge that you're not going to do it and remove it from your mental load. By making a decision about each unfinished loop, it helps you to kind of close out that neurological file and either set it for a to-do for later or archive it. Then your brain can release it and stop monitoring that thing. Also, paying attention to your physical space doesn't require massive redecorating, just a little bit of tidying or decluttering, particularly in the area where you're immediately working. Putting things away, maybe even pushing them off to the side, whatever it takes to feel like you're in the right space to begin your project. And it's important to acknowledge that not every strategy works the same for every person. So, like with anything, I think a trial and error can be very helpful to see which elements work the best for you and which maybe are less effective. But it is helpful and important to more deeply understand how some of these different aspects interplay with one another. I do offer a mindset membership that includes many of the tools that I mentioned today, including access to recorded hypnosis, yoga nidra, journey audios, short meditation audios, and videos for EFT tapping, each of which are available on demand to you so that you can pull them up and use them at any time that you need them in order to regulate your nervous system, clear emotional blocks, rejuvenate your mindset, and create the best possible environment for you to be able to proceed forward with your goals. I hope you found this to be interesting and helpful. And until we connect the next time, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at RavenMosaic.com.